Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive paradigm shift in modern supply chain excellence. We are moving away from an era of complete system overload, and we're stepping into an environment of absolute, immediate clarity. Let's jump right in.
Picture a scenario that I bet feels all too familiar. In almost every supply chain organization, across pretty much every global sector, there's this creeping, silent problem. Your teams are working harder than ever, right? Yet somehow, strategic decision-making actually feels slower and way more cumbersome. Well, the Supply Access methodology was built to solve this exact bottleneck. It's specifically designed to untangle those dense chains of corporate information, and it completely transforms everyday professionals into high-level, insight-driven operators.
You know, we live in an era where data is literally everywhere. Your teams are probably swimming, or let's be honest, drowning, in endless ERP exports, massive procurement reports, and deeply complex logistics files. You can probably feel that dashboard overload right now, where millions of rows of data are just sitting out there on a server. But here's the catch. Despite this massive digital footprint, true actionable executive insight remains astonishingly rare. We've successfully built the architecture to store all this data, but we've kind of fundamentally failed at the architecture of actually understanding it.
And this lack of insight becomes painfully obvious during those critical, high-stakes moments. Imagine a CEO or a top supply chain leader walking into a boardroom. The meeting starts, and they just ask a fundamental, straightforward question. Where is our biggest cost driver? In an environment that's suffering from data overload, that simple, logical question plunges the entire organization into absolute chaos.
So, why the chaos? Because finding the answer to that simple question usually takes hours, or sometimes even days. Highly paid, incredibly smart professionals are basically forced to leave that boardroom, retreat to their desks, and build heavy, complex models just to answer that one basic inquiry. They are trapped in slow-motion data processing. It's just a massive waste of human capital, dedicating brilliant minds to manually wrangling static dashboards that simply cannot adapt fast enough to the reality of the business.
But then came the inciting incident. Supply chains stopped being simple. The corporate landscape is now flashing with red indicators of complexity everywhere you look. Global disruptions, deeply fragmented supplier networks, highly volatile consumer demand, and massive rising cost pressures. The old, rigid systems simply broke down. I mean, in a world where supply chain risk is compounding overnight, a static, unmoving dashboard from last month, it's entirely useless. Because of that, leadership suddenly stopped asking for those dense, 50-page monthly reports. Instead, they started demanding fast clarity. Complex questions are now flying across the executive table in real time. Which suppliers drive 80% of our spend? Where are savings actually coming from? Which category is structurally underperforming? The demands of leadership have completely changed, and the old way of heavy, slow-moving modeling is officially dead.
Which brings us to a fundamental, absolute non-negotiable reality of modern supply chains. Speed of understanding is more valuable than perfect analysis. I really want to let that sink in. In a live executive meeting, dealing with a live global disruption, nobody waits for an exhaustive, perfect, decimal point accurate model. They need direction. They need to know the macro drivers, and they need to know them right now.
Now, hiding inside our existing systems lies a tool most people use, but honestly, very few truly understand: the pivot table. And we aren't talking about a basic reporting feature here. This is a dynamic business lens. It is an engine for fast, structural thinking that allows you to cut through the noise and see the pure logic of your data almost instantly. It is literally the bridge between raw chaos and structured corporate strategy. Just imagine a highly chaotic procurement dataset. You've got hundreds of active projects, multiple manufacturing sites, dozens of product lines. Instead of building a fragile, complex model to understand it, you simply rotate your perspective. In seconds, you drag and drop to reveal a crystal-clear supplier view, instantly switch it up to a category view, then a plant view, then pivot again to evaluate project owner performance. It's the exact same underlying data, instantly rotated to reveal completely different, high-level business stories. This is the dividing line between the past and the future of supply chain analytics. The old way meant hours of heavy lifting, tedious modeling, and constantly checking formulas. The new way is entirely about seconds of thinking. You're no longer just manually processing numbers row by row. You are actively exploring them, discovering those clear lines of logic and strategic meaning hidden right there within the chaos.
Let's be real about the harsh executive reality of the modern boardroom. The professional who can answer a complex, multi-layered business question in 10 seconds is universally perceived as vastly more competent than the one who takes 2 hours. And it's rarely because they know more about the underlying data. It's because their analytical structure is immediate. They've completely removed the friction between a question and an answer. It really all comes down to this core truth. Insight velocity creates professional credibility. In supply chain management, your ability to rapidly translate massive amounts of raw data into a coherent, defensible perspective is exactly what builds profound trust with leadership. Speed isn't just a nice-to-have anymore. Speed is the very foundation of your professional credibility.
This marks the evolution of a true supply chain professional. It's the vital shift between merely reporting data and actively interpreting business behavior. When you manipulate data dynamically, you spark a moment of genuine transformation. You force yourself to stop looking at static spreadsheets and start asking, what dimension of the business am I actually trying to understand here? You're hunting for that spark of insight rather than just tallying up the math.
So let's put this into practice with a scenario that really challenges how we traditionally view optimization. We're going to uncover the hidden truth between absolute numbers and percentages. Look, it's human nature to gravitate toward the largest visible number in the room, but the supply axis methodology demands a much sharper, more critical lens.
Consider two strategic partners for a second. Supplier A delivers $5 million in hard cost savings. Supplier B delivers $2 million in savings. On the surface, if we only look at the absolute volume of money saved, Supplier A looks like the undisputed champion, right? But let's look a little deeper at the total spend. Supplier A's $5 million in savings came from a massive $500 million spend portfolio. Meanwhile, Supplier B's savings came from a highly focused $10 million spend. So, as an executive, who is actually delivering the stronger performance?
Relying solely on absolute numbers is deeply misleading and, honestly, often dangerous. When we dynamically shift our perspective and instantly calculate the percentage distribution, the true story emerges. Supplier A, despite the big dollar amount, yielded a mere 1% optimization rate. Supplier B, however, delivered a staggering 20% savings rate. Without the agility to instantly shift perspectives, which a dynamic lens does with zero complex formulas, your strategic procurement decisions could be entirely wrong.
The absolute elite professionals do not use these tools to build static historical reports. They use them for strategic storytelling. They're answering the highest level questions in real time, right there in the room. Where is 80% of our concentration actually happening? What variables are truly driving performance? And most crucially, where is risk silently accumulating in our network before it blows up into a crisis?
Which leads us to the ultimate equation for modern operators. Analytical speed equals strategic influence. When you possess the capability to manipulate massive data sets and answer complex questions instantly, you totally transcend the role of a traditional analyst. You elevate your career. You become a pivotal, irreplaceable voice in charting the strategic direction of your entire company.
This is the final transformation. We are permanently leaving behind the era of slowly building reports. The modern, highly valued professional is singularly focused on exploring data faster and challenging deeply held assumptions instantly. You elevate from a mere software user just clicking through menus to an insight-driven operator commanding a clean, clear environment where strategic decisions become totally obvious.
I'll leave you with this final, defining principle. In supply chain, the fastest thinker in the room becomes the most trusted voice in the room. So the next time you open a massive data set or face a complex logistical challenge, I want you to ask yourself, are you just processing numbers? Or are you exploring them fast enough to command that trust? Thanks for joining me.